Hello students, Sarita here. In this episode students, let's study some of the terms associated with genetics. Students, we all know living organisms reproduce and bacterium would give rise to another bacterium. Similarly, an seed would produce a plant. Same is the case in case of humans too. Students, this process is what we call as reproduction. We see from a pea plant arises a pea, and from this peas arises another pea plant. Similarly, cats produce kittens. Students, this pattern where parental characters are transferred to young ones from one generation to another is called as heredity. Now let's see some of the characters like the skin color, the eye color, the hair color, variations, that is presence of curly or straight hair, presence or absence of dimples, the variations in the height. So we see variety of combinations in these. Again, if we consider this group of cats, don't they resemble each other? At the same time, students, they also show variations from each other. This study, where we study about resemblances and variations, that is, a totality of study of heredity and variation, is what we call as genetics. The term genetics was first introduced by the scientist William Batson in the year 1906. Genetics, the term is derived from a term termed as genesis, which means to grow. Of having studied about genesis and genetics, now students, let's study some of the terms associated with genetics. To begin with, what is a factor? Factor was a term introduced by Mendel, the father of genetics. So factor is a component in an organism responsible for inheritance and expression. We move on to the next term, that is a gene. The modern scientific world, after Mendel, referred the same factor as gene. So gene is a segment of DNA responsible for inheritance and expression of a particular character. And observe students, this is a chromosome as we represent, and it is a segment on the chromosome. As we move on to the next term, that is allele. Alternate form of a gene is an allele. All organisms being diploid in nature, so the gene is present on the pair of these homologous chromosomes. And when it is present, so we call it as an allele. So a pair of genes is what we term as an allele, representing a character. As we observe, look at these alleles present at identical locus of homologous chromosomes. Another allele, and that's it. We move on to the next term, that is homozygous. A condition where individuals possess similar alleles for a particular character. Observe, if they have similar alleles, maybe dominant or recessive alleles, then such a condition is called as homozygous condition. So we have homozygous tall, that is capital T and capital T. And we have homozygous dwarf condition, that is small t and small t. We will move on to this concept later. The next term is heterozygous. Individuals possessing dissimilar alleles for a particular trait or a character is what we term as heterozygous condition. Observe students, we have the homologous chromosome here, but one of the allele is capital T and the other allele is small t. So such a condition is what we term as heterozygous condition. Next, we move on to phenotype. The external appearance of an individual for any trait is what we term as phenotype. The plant that we see here is a tall plant. So phenotypically or external appearance wise, this is a tall plant. Next we move on to genotype. Representation of the genetic constitution of an individual is what we term as genotype. So this plant is a tall plant, pea plant, but it may be having a capital T homozygous tall, or it may be a capital T small t, which is a heterozygous tall. See here, it can be so. Then we move on to hybrid. Heterozygous individuals produced from a cross between two pure parents is what we term as a hybrid. Observe the sequence, students. We have tall plant and dwarf plant. The genotype of the tall plant is capital T, whereas the genotype of the dwarf plant is a small t, so they are pure line. So definitely when they are producing gametes, the tall plant would produce capital T and small dwarf plant would produce small t. When these two gametes come together, they would produce a product which is capital T, small t, which is called as an hybrid, and this hybrid is heterozygous. Observe, it's got capital T and small t, this hybrid, which is an heterozygous and heterozygous tall individual. So the plant is going to be, such a plant is going to be tall, but its genotype is going to be capital T, small t. Isn't it different from the parental type capital T, which was a tall, students? So we have learnt regarding the terms. We will get back to you.